Good. Welcome to this meeting of the Opiate Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Wheel, Chair of the committee. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, and I'd like to welcome all of those in attendance in the meeting room and on YouTube to the meeting. Before we start the meeting, could I ask everyone in attendance to make sure their mobile phones are switched off or on silent? And we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. I have received apologies for absence from the Porter Baxter, and I've received apologies for lateness from Councillor Bunton. So, if does any member have any interest to declare? No? There are two sets of minutes for us to agree or not agree. The minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of November and those from the 20th of November. Both minutes have been circulated. Are the committee happy that I sign them as a correct record?
Agreed.
Sorry, yeah, I do have a point on those.
About the accuracy of the minutes. John?
Well, on
Which minutes are we talking about?
so 3B, which is the second set of minutes, on page 15, point 7, we call the restorative justice programme, and I think on point 7 on page 16, again it says there are 4 phases of the restorative justice programme. Now, as far as I'm aware, there were 4 phases of engagement in the restorative justice programme, which has not yet been delivered. It was in the process of being implemented. So the restorative justice programme, that terminology, is not just for engagement, it is the whole thing, which we are calling to Grenfell support. So when it says on point 7, page 15, recall the restorative justice programme, I think that is referring to the engagement rather than the programme itself.
Okay, yep, we'll amend that.
So if that could be clarified, I think, for anyone reading it, otherwise it does get quite confusing. On the other minutes, page 3A, point 16 on page 7, where it talks about potential conflicts of interest. That was a point specifically about council employees rather than a general point. And I think it needs
Sorry,
to be
which point was it?
16 at the bottom.
16, sorry.
On page 7.
And it was in relation particularly to
Council employees.
reprisals by
So the potential conflicts of interest among council employees. The incentives and reprisals refer to individuals and community groups. But the video will show that.
Can we just we'll double check that on the not because I disagree with you that's what's meant, but let's just check that's what's actually fully expressed, and if it was, then is everyone happy that I amend them? We amend.
Great.
Good. Nothing other than that, with those 2 reservations now, signing was correct. Thank you. Good. We are now moving on to paper 4, the update on the Oracle project. So please come to the table on. Is this the on the end date? What does he want to do as introduction?
I'm sure.
It's no need to look too enthusiastic.
Yes, I know. No, it's that I'm very enthusiastic. This is a really important project. Clearly how our payroll systems work and that they work is vital. If we have a system that doesn't work and people are paid the wrong amounts or not paid on time, then the consequences can be really severe and they can become really severe quite quickly. And our previous system, or rather the existing system, has not worked well enough at all. So I think it's really important that we do this. I anticipate that the real thrust tonight will be about anxiety around our ability to deliver it on time and on budget. I think what I can say is that I am also anxious about that, or anxious that we should do it, in the way that we said. I'm getting regular updates from officers and I'm currently being assured that it is going reasonably well. But I welcome the opportunity to have you all probe it further because it is a priority and I recognise it as such.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to the committee for questions. Can I just say it would be my preference that everybody had one set of questions. So please try and draw your thoughts together when I get to you for questions rather than coming back for a second round. It just streamlines the meeting a bit. Claire, can I start with you?
I didn't have any questions on this.
Fair enough.
So we can be
Right, quite right to declare we do. What about you, Lucy?
I was just going to ask whether, from your engagement with Birmingham City Council and West Sussex County Council, if you have learned anything from them, mistakes in their rollout and kind of integration and how they're being incorporated and how we're pushing this out.
Yes, indeed we have. So the big thing in particular for both of them is the adopt, not adapt. So they try to adapt the system rather than adopt it. And by doing that, they've tried to put in lots of different processes that aren't coming out of the box, and therefore one costs a lot of money to implement in the first instance, but every time they're told roll out an upgrade, they have to go back and manually do that upgrade. So our mantra for this project throughout, and you'll have heard me say this before, I'm sure, is to adopt, not adapt. And we are really taking that forward. You'll see it mentioned in this paper. So everything that comes to us through the team, through the project that has an adaptation requirement, we have a whole system in place, and David chairs a board that actually explores every option first to challenge whether it's an absolute essential that we need to adapt it or can we just adopt it. Birmingham in particular tried to recreate their old SAP system in Oracle, and that was one of their big downcomes. So that's the biggest learning we've got from both of them.
Thank you, Joanna.
I remember the iterations beforehand, Hampshire, and that was on wheels. So I suppose my real fundamental question is how sure, because you said reasonably sure. How sure can you be? And when would you have more certainty?
Well, I suppose the reason I'm reasonably confident is that until the day it's on and it's working and it's live, we can't be absolutely certain. And it is a really complex project with a lot of interdependencies. It's taken a long time to introduce and to integrate. And so I'm trying to be realistic about that. I suppose insofar as I can be sure at this stage, officers are advising that it's on time and within the budget that we've most recently set. Those are really critical kind of markers for me because the big risks are delay, overspends, or the system not working. So those are kind of the key areas that I'm looking at. But you may want to give further, you may want to repeat the assurances you've given me in order to give confidence to the committee.
Happy to do that. So I think for me, having lived through the previous implementation of the Hampshire solution, but also been aware of the lessons we learned from the GT Aggresso solution previously, which was very much an adapt, not adopt approach. It's very clear that the work we've done around data migration, which was a key critical risk for this programme, because Hampshire had not transferred somebody away from their solution previously, so we're the first partner to move away. That's gone much better than we and they expected. So the quality of data that has been transferred is much higher than we expected. We're now doing the parallel payroll runs, and again, they are performing much more strongly than we have expected, and much stronger than we performed when we moved to Hampshire from BT Aggresso. So these are key fundamentals that mean we can see that we've got a really tight timescale to keep working to, but we keep it in these milestones with high success in terms of quality of data. There's lots of good testing going on now, which again is a good testing regime. There's a good program team who are overseeing this. I'm also reviewing the risks for them every month as well across the piece. There's lots of good rigour and governance and challenge within the programme to make sure it's on track.
What is the concept of hypercare? As in 3.7.
I suppose you might call it hand-holding to an extent. So when any new system goes live and users are getting used to a system, you want them to be able to feel like they're getting used to it very quickly. So hypercare is a way of wrapping that some additional support around both users but also the organisation to make sure it's actually implementing it well, and any sort of teething problems are dealt with quickly and effectively.
Yeah, it's a short period of time where we've got extra to make sure everybody's up and running and expanding it. So, and then that starts to reduce away. That's why we're doing a project like this.
Last question. The BT Aggresso system was payroll and finance payments. This is purely payments.
No, this is both. This is everything.
This is both.
Yeah.
So where are we getting the reassurance on finance? Because most of the focus seems to be on payroll. It's mostly there.
Yeah, so again, on the data migration side, on the finance side, we're having exactly the same sort of levels of success in terms of the way the data has been migrated across from SAP into the new Oracle solution. There's been good engagement with the external auditor about the work that needs to be done, so we need to reassure them, as we're going to be closing down at the end of March on the current system, that we've got good processes in place to transfer and then to be able to close the accounts in the new system, and they're very much on board with the work we're doing, the way we planned it. They've had input into the programme and the plan as well to make sure that we're taking account of what their needs are. So I think, again, we're getting good assurance from Grant Thornton that we're doing the right things. I mean, they've been through this experience with many other clients as well, the external auditor.
One more. If I'm a supplier, how do I know that this isn't a phishing exercise when I'm told that I have to pay to a different bank account or a different?
So again, the supplier data will be migrated, and we're doing checks on that currently. We're validating all the data to make sure it's clean, it's accurate. There's communication they'll be going out to suppliers, so that nothing will change in terms of them receiving their payments. We're communicating with them how they're going to receive the payments and where from. But that's all in hand in terms of the communication strategy as well. Make sure that it's a smooth transition from a current solution, current method, to the new solution.
Great. Thanks very much. I'll start with the going back to the adopt, not adapt principle, which seems to be a good idea that's not often followed in the public sector. So I'm just wondering to what extent or how many examples there are of where we have adapted rather than adopted, because I've got the impression there were some. And is there any current functionality that we would regret or we think we might regret losing because we're adopting and we're just going along with the new system and it's going to be second best because we're not adapting? That's my first question. I'm interested in getting all my questions out of the way in one go. The second one completely different. The risks in section 5. I thought that's the first section 5 on page 30, 35 to 36. As you probably know, I always like to see the risks on a chart with the likelihood of impact plotted. But I do accept that this paper says that exists somewhere else. So unlike the previous one I saw, which didn't tell me that, give me that assurance. But are these the top risks that you've got listed? What's the status in terms of likelihood and impact? Are these the ones we really need to be focusing on, or is there a whole load of others that we're not seeing that we've thought to worry us?
That's okay. Yeah. So these are the highest risks on the programme, but they are all being managed. So they are, they're inherently high in terms of the risks. So particularly move from Hampshire because it's their first move. There's a high risk. The point around single points of failure in programme staff is something that is inherently high risk. But again, there's been steps taken to address that through the programme. So there is a detailed risk register that sits behind this, and these are the highest risks register.
And in terms of where do you plot them in terms of likelihood and impact?
So I think that they're all red, and one might be amber, but they are the highest score of cases, but they are in that vein because of the magnitude of the impact if they were failed, but the likelihood is reducing because the mitigations will be in place.
Right. Okay. Well, that's in the chart. If there's another iteration of paper, I'd like to see that in the detail. But yes, thank you for that assurance. But then I had a first questions on.
Adopt and not adapt question.
So I think on that, so we've got a very experienced program director who's working with us, who's seen lots of projects of this nature where there have been hundreds of adaptations or more. We've had significantly lower numbers of that, and there's been a rigorous challenge, as Lisa says, about each change that we're making. There have been no significant changes through the adopt not adapt process. I don't think there are any areas where we will regret not adopting rather than adapting. So that the principle with these things is that Oracle is a market leading solution. It works and it works well when it's adopted, and it works fine authorities across London where that's been the case as well. The adaptation is the bit that really causes problems. I don't think there's anything we're losing by adopting rather than adapting.
No, we've got two very experienced functional leads, one leading finance and one leading HR. And they are doing that rigorous challenge and check to make sure that we get everything we want out of the system. And actually, I think they are doing a really good job on that. So I don't think we'll lose any functionality. It'll be different. It definitely won't be the same. But I don't think we'll lose functionality.
Well,
I have to say that I'm really jaundiced in this area, having been lead member when things really went really badly wrong. In the experience prior to my time before BT and during BT, the only thing we were able to do was to pay teachers with cash and with checks for using quill pens. So that was the only backup plan. Having said that, I think there's been a big improvement through the Hampshire experience. Not that it's perfect, but there's been a big improvement. A lot of learning here. Questions are, I'm hearing the same assurances. So, in terms of owning the assurances, I'd like to ask Maxine if you're happy to accept this as CEO of the council, accept the ownership of the risk in this area, because the council was in a very bad position previously. I've heard the assurances. I believe what you say, but if they, I personally can't actually get a measure even out of this paper as to whether we're really in a really good place. And alongside asking Maxine for that, is there any plan to run in parallel some real-time data? I think it's probably more in the financial area rather than paper, which tends to be batch. At the moment, it talks about batch tests here. Are we going to run the two systems in parallel to make sure there's veracity between the two? Or are we planning to pull the switch and hand it from one to the other? So it's one question to you and one question to Maxine.
I'll let Lisa answer the point about the parallel running. So the short answer to your question is yes, I am. The buck stops with me on this. I'm absolutely happy to accept that responsibility and risk, and not remotely complacent about it. So this is something that my management team we call over on a regular basis and drill into the information that are given, my observations of it, and the assurance that I get from David and from the partners involved is that this is outward looking in terms of learning from other places and learning from other mistakes. It is well planned and it is being well tested, but none of that makes me complacent about the actual running. But I suppose the last thing I'd say, because I really appreciate the experiences that you have witnessed, Councillor Pascal, but I think there wasn't a do nothing option here, and so we didn't undertake this project on any kind of wing. It was a business case on the balance of risks and what this could offer us as opposed to what Hampshire could have offered us, and there would have been significant risk to staying in Hampshire.
I say thank you for that, and I thought I had to ask you.
Yeah,
I had previous experience.
absolutely. I will
No,
let Lisa answer the other bit.
Happy to pick up the question on the parallel data. So payroll is called parallel payroll running. So we take the data from the current SAP system and we're actually putting that proper data into Oracle. We've got over a 90% success rate with parallel payroll run 1, and we're doing 3. And every time we do another one, it gets better and better. So I think we've already mentioned, actually, we got better results from 1 than we thought we would. So we'll only get better and better. Piece of work that's going on at the moment is just to look at all of those things that did fail or didn't quite match and correct them so that when we do 2, they won't be there again. There might be some slightly different ones. And then when we do 3, so we're using absolute live payroll data to do that. From a finance point of view and the data there, again, we're using live data. We do data migration. So we take it out of SAP and we put it into Oracle. And again, we're testing that through. We've done 3 data migrations at the moment. We've got 2 more to do. And again, we're getting really good success rates.
What success rates you?
Over 90%. Again, it says in the paper, I think it says nearly 95%. So they're high 90s.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And no questions.
Sorry, again, on the adoption, what percentage is the adoption and versus adoption?
Very high. I mean, the
Really
number of
high,
controls in
yeah.
any
So what is it?
enterprise
75,
resource management
80?
are thousands of controls, and we're talking about tens of changes that we've
So
made.
it's high 90s.
Yes.
High 90s.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And then on page 31, we talk about Tom. Sorry, yeah. Page 30, point 3.7. You talk about a new target operating model. And I'm just intrigued, is that an internal model or external?
So it's an internal model. So at the moment, Hampshire provide a number of services for us, as you'll be aware. So we have to create systems in-house to do that. So that's what we're calling our target operating model. So we're bringing in-house things like payroll, accounts payable. We're bringing in-house the systems. So we need to set up a help desk and a systems administration function. It's all coming into the council. We're well on our way through recruitment for that. In fact, we've had a really good success rate on the finance side. We've recruited all of the accounts payable team, and we're in the process of onboarding them now. And we've recruited all of the help desk functions for the finance side, and we're just following up now, just slightly behind with the payroll and the help desk side for HR. They're all the internal stuff.
Okay, so the testing that you mentioned earlier on the functionality,
Yeah.
that's all internal stuff as well. There are no external bodies.
So
The testing.
the testing that's taking place at the moment is a combination of our staff that is seconded into the project, our staff that are still sitting in their business as usual day jobs who would use.
So they're seconded from external.
They're internal seconded
Internal
into the
secondments.
project. And then people who are still sitting in their HR and their finance functions testing as well, because they will be the users of the system.
Yeah.
And then we've also got our systems integration partner, which is version 1. They're helping us with that testing.
So that's the external.
That's
That's
external. Yeah.
Okay. And my final question, page 31, 3.10. You talk about there's a deadline to exercise. It says on the 31st of January.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, do you have any indication how likely this is?
At the moment, we don't think we need to exercise it.
Oh, so you're pretty confident on that? Okay, so.
We do have a board meeting in Hampshire on that day to make sure that we're comfortable with it, but at the moment, yeah.
Right, okay. Thank you, Chair.
I just wanted to ask on 310 what the cutover process is. It's on kind of in the main paragraph, the third line up. The detailed mechanism of how the cutover process will work, and then the programme is focusing on not needing to implement this option. What is? Couldn't work out if that was go or no go, or neither. I should have picked it up earlier, I'm sorry.
Sorry, which answer?
310,
Yeah.
main paragraph.
Yeah.
Third line from the
Yeah.
bottom, end of the line, it says,
Oh, yeah,
we're going,
Yeah, so this is cutting over the data in one system.
so moving it from one to the other.
And all the processes as well. So
Okay, I think I was fooled by the next sentence, so it said the programme is focusing on not needing to implement this option, but clearly we are gonna, what that's not referring to cut over, it's
that's
referring
referring
to.
to the 31st
Robert.
of January.
Yes,
yes.
yeah.
And
And
so
so-
a bad organisation of sentences.
No, that's fine.
Apologies.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something vital. And then my fundamental question is, who and how and when is that final decision going to be made? Because it's an incredibly brave decision to go, and it's also an incredibly brave decision not to go. And it's a very, from what I hear today, you're confident that you're going to go, but who knows what the next week or 2 weeks is going to throw up. How does that decision get made and when?
This, you want to start on
Yeah.
our.
So, as we talk about in this report, we've got a number of boards, the programme steering group, in Hampshire as well. So the first meetings will be the programme steering group to hear from our partners, do they think we're ready? And when I say partners, I mean version 1 as our systems integrator and Socketing as our business integrator. They've done this elsewhere, so they will know what position we're at. So we'll go from them. We'll have our own feelings as well from all of the work we've done. We've heard back from our functional leads, what we've looked at in our risk register. We will then sit down as a group, programme steering group. I'll talk to Mike Curtis as well, who's the sponsor for this. And then we will talk to Hampshire as well to understand whether they think we're in a position we need to go. So it will ultimately be a decision from Mike as the
So Mike will make the final decision, having been advised by all these groups.
absolutely.
And that will happen presumably in a couple of days before the sort of cut-off
So we're
date.
meeting Hampshire on the 30th of January. And the reason pushing it towards the end is it's moving all of the time, this project. If we had that conversation, we won't not have any conversations between now and the 30th, but that's the sort of decision.
And can I just add that might even make that decision with reference to me
Absolutely.
and to John as the member and also David as director of risk. So so because it's a big decision to take.
It's a
So
huge decision. Yeah.
we don't sit on the board. Well, sorry, I don't sit on the board, but we will have that additional check.
Thank you. I think that's all on this paper. Thank you very much indeed. It's clear, some positive news on that. The next going to go to the paper 5, which is the cost of living paper, which is a separate contract. This paper updates us on how council will disperse the 6th tranche of the government's household support fund, and that 1.2 million. October 24 to March 25. So we've got Johnny, Claire and Callum here to introduce this sometime between.
Yes, so thank you for having this paper come to OSC. I think over the past 3 years or so now, the cost of living has been one of the biggest issues in our borough. We've seen many more people go into poverty, and it's affecting a much larger number of households. In that context, I think the council's done a lot of work to alleviate the cost of living pressures. There are things that we've always done, like our council tax reduction scheme, which is about £14 million now in our revenue budget every year, which is one of the biggest in London. We've also put, and this is something that you did in the leadership team, Mary, the COVID fund, which was then repurposed as a cost of living reserve, from which we've done a range of things, some of which are in this paper. Probably the most notable of which are the £200 rebates we've done over the past couple of years. What we're looking to do here with the Household Support Fund, which is working in tandem with that, is build on some of the things that have worked. So essentially what we're saying in this paper is that we have notified government that we intend to use the 6th tranche primarily to continue the two most impactful interventions that we think there have been over the past couple of years. So one around preschool meals during holidays, and another which will be a cost of living rebate again, funded through the household support fund. Obviously, we can't in a single swish of a pen mitigate all of the pressures, but I think it's important that we as a council seek to do as much as we possibly can, because, as I say, it's a major issue.
When do I know? Sorry.
That's okay. So coming to the end anyway. I said thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to start? Bridget, I'll work around this way.
Sure.
Page 6.
Point 3.4. It talks about the 6 million cost of living reserve. What I want to know is that the last sentence, the only remaining funding from the 8 million is public health grant funding. What percentage of that is
Well, when we
out of the 8 million?
Well, I was going to say that when we started the cost of living or the COVID fund and then the cost of living reserve, it was made up of, I think it was half general fund money and half public health money. So what the paper's saying is that the half that was general fund has been spent and the residual sum is all public health money, but you'll be able to check how much it is. I think it's
2.3.
Yeah.
2.3
million. And that is we've actually had a meeting today with public health officers around how we will spend the money in accordance with the public health grant, which obviously has to have precedent over what we spend the money on, in addition to achieving sort of broader transformation across the organisation. So the governance of how we're spending that money falls within the Savings Transformation Programme to make sure that we both deliver public health outcomes that are impactful for the council in ways that align with their very important grant conditions. So it's still being spent in this arena, but just in a slightly different way.
Okay. Great question. On page 17, this is just maybe I'm misreading the figures. It says we've got 15,179 households at 9,904 of working age. Does that include? Does it include? Sorry. Does it include anyone with disability or single mothers or?
Yeah, so those figures are primarily about people of working age who are on the low income family tracker, and it's obviously broken down by ward, so it would include those people. We can capture separately. The advantage of Lift is that we can cut the data in various different ways, and we can look at both what benefits people are entitled to and what benefits we're receiving to understand better some of their circumstances, including whether they're parents or indeed living with disability.
Right. Okay. Right. Check.
Thank you, on page 11, just a quick question about the £50 payment, paragraph 5.5. And you say that £50 payment may not be considered meaningful. I'd like to hear a bit more about that. And in paragraph 5.6, you say that you may be looking at other options. So to understand a bit more about those other options, you just give me a breakdown on why you think that you say that it may not be considered meaningful.
Yeah, well, I suppose that is a matter of judgment. In the past 2 years, we've done £100 payments, which people I think have said to us has been meaningful. The biggest consultation the council did last year was the consultation it did on the last cost of living rebate, and it had the highest support of any consultation we ran either as well. So I think from that, we deduced that it did have an impact and people were happy that we did it. Obviously, if you halve the sum, that has a risk that people consider it less meaningful. I think that's the kind of the matter of judgment that we're kind of commenting on there. And it's for us as politicians to weigh where on the spectrum is the right level, mindful of the financial constraints, the envelopes that we have available. In terms of other options, I mean, this what we're presenting tonight exhausts the money that we anticipate receiving from the government through the household support fund, and it also makes use of last year's underspend, which we think is a pragmatic way to boost it. Were we to explore other options in relation to a direct cash payment that would come from council funding, probably. There are many ways that you could do that. So you could account for it as part of the general fund. You could, in terms of revenue, you could do it through reserves. There are multiple kinds of reserves that we could go to that would mean that there is less or no impact on the general fund's revenue position. But these are things that we would have to, I suppose, win the argument for, first within the leadership team, and then with the assorted committees that exist within the council. So probably what we're saying here is that this is what we've got to so far, and that were we to increase the level of a payment, we would have to win that argument amongst colleagues.
And then the only other thing that one might add is around the choice and control aspect of this. So I think there is something very empowering about enabling and seeing the power of our residents to be able to determine what might help them in a moment of need. And I think then that if you then think about this as a payment for a household, payment for what can you actually achieve with different amounts of money, there is something about ensuring that that choice that you're really giving someone is a meaningful choice. As Johnny said, it's a reflection of choice internally first.
And just to add briefly, we had about, I think we had feedback from over 500 residents who received the payment, some of whom kind of gave us free text comments as well as giving us information about how it had been spent and the difference it had made. And I think some people felt that £100 made more of a difference than perhaps we might think around this table, and that it enabled them to do things that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to do. Others felt that perhaps it wasn't as impactful as it might have been. And I think at the moment we're looking, £50 payment would be to everybody on lift, so it would be a repeat of the kind of scheme we did last year. There are of course options in terms of targeting further, but I think what we gain in terms of being able to make a bigger payment, we lose in terms of simplicity, because as we'll see from the breakdown of the data on lift, it is difficult to start distinguishing between different cohorts. But that's what we've been tasked to do, to go away and develop some options about how we might either increase the value of the payment or target it more effectively.
Thank you. Will.
Thank you. I know that paper 6 is to come next, and it is different and it has more consultation perhaps than this. But first question is whether there's an alignment or awareness of that paper within the work that's happening with this paper, so that they will eventually be consistent.
There is. I would say yes. The answer is, of course, there should be a read across between the two. And I think actually there's an opportunity, because the Fairer Action Plan strategies can be quite difficult to grip. And this has the potential to be quite a simple, visible means of communicating our values. And I think that might be quite a powerful statement and a hope for the work.
Thank you. Second thing is in relation to preschool meals, which is a very substantial part of this. And I have to declare that I'm a school governor, and therefore I've seen how the impact of preschool meals on the performance of children in schools and so on. But the question is to do with how does the cost level that's in this paper relate to the cost of providing meals in schools? Because whilst they're called free, they're actually contracted for in schools, and there's quite a variety of contract performance difference amongst different schools. So have you bench tested the means of providing free school meals not in schools either, with the cost of providing free school meals in term time through schools? And also together with that, how is it who is it done by, where is it done, and also particularly one of the things that we've had to do in schools is diet safe, as we call it, which is, people have either allergies or religious requirements or other thing, medical, such like.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to check about the per unit cost of normal free school meals. What these are vouchers for people to use in holiday time.
Right.
This is at the more generous end. I think there's only one other London council who offers a scheme as generous as this during holidays. But it is they are vouchers provided directly to families through schools, which support them with the
So in
cost
effect,
of.
that all the points I've made with regard to choice of food, etc., are parental choice,
Exactly.
or carer choice.
Exactly.
Oh.
And just to add briefly, Councillor Pascal, on your point about the Fair Action Plan, I think we very much see this as two pieces of work which are closely aligned. One of the pieces of work we've actually done this week is to use some of the information on the low income family tracker to make some targeted calls across a number of different teams to pensioners. As you may be aware, the deadline for residents to apply for pension credit and to be entitled to the winter fuel allowances this coming Saturday, and there is a support offer from the voluntary and community sector organisations, but we as the council hold the data and can't share that data without a data sharing agreement. So what we have done is use some of the volunteers to make those calls to encourage people to sign up. And I think that's a good example of what we'll see in the next paper about how we can use the data that we hold as a council to more effectively target some of the initiatives, interventions, and make the most of the broader support that's available across the partnership.
I think you've answered my final question, which was to be, this exercise appears to have the ability to reach some hard to reach groups. And once you've achieved that target, do you use that access to make available information or other services to that group?
So one of the things that we did with the scheme last time is used it as an opportunity to work with some of the voluntary and community sector organisations to pull together a list of broader support that was available. I think we could do both more in that space. We could also look to increase the uptake of the payment. So I think the paper says that there were about 16,000 households eligible for the last payment, and I think about 13,000 took it up. So it was automatic wherever it could be, but in some cases, and in more cases than we thought, we needed to encourage residents to submit bank details. But one of the advantages of Lift is that we do have contact details for residents, and I think we could definitely use it as an opportunity to follow up and understand more about some of the barriers that they face. And again, that's something that I think chimes with the broader principles and commitments in the Fair Action.
Which could link back to the question I was asking about diet safe, which is still parental choice, but giving information to parents about safe diets and diets that don't cause obesity would also be an option.
Yeah, and Public Health told us today that actually we're one of the few London councils where obesity rates are going down in comparison to going up. And I think it's difficult to rely on causality all the time, but schemes like this must help.
Thank you.
Actually, should I mind them?
Thank you.
I think there is total causality.
Thank you, Mary. I'll do this in one go. So firstly, a comment on page 14, first set of 3 bullets. Third bullet, this paper refers to what it calls a bedroom tax, which is jargon. Now, I know it's commonly called that, but it's not actually a tax, and this is an official paper, so it does not use the correct terminology. I can't remember what it is.
Spare rooms, obviously.
Thank you. It definitely shouldn't be using party jargon in the paper or going forward. Now, my question is returning back to the free school meals at paragraph 1.4. The Mayor of London's scheme has been criticised for being a scattergun approach to universal provision, even for those who don't need it. And I'd like some assurance that our scheme is going to be more focused on those who actually need it, which there are definitely some out there, as revealed by this paper. And then in terms of the mechanics of paying for it and getting those vouchers out, is there a role for schools in that, or is that happening directly in council? So how does that work?
So on the first question, Councillor Hammond, so the Mayor of London, you're absolutely right, the Mayor of London's scheme is universal for primary school pupils. Our scheme is restricted to those eligible for free school meals during the holidays. So it tries to make sure that support during the holidays is as targeted as possible. And you're absolutely right, we have an established mechanism for schools to distribute those vouchers. And that's the way the scheme has run since we started funding it through the Household Support Fund. So schools play a role in making sure that families eligible for free school meals have those vouchers for the holiday.
But I sense a contradiction there, because you're saying in the one hand there's an eligibility under the Mayor of London scheme to everybody, and on the other hand you're saying there's a tighter eligibility, which was probably more traditional
free school meals eligibility? Do we have both?
So the Mayor of London scheme is obviously paid for and funded and organised by the Mayor of London.
Yeah.
That is a universal scheme for
Yeah.
primary school pupils. Our scheme is focused specifically on holidays rather than term time, and that is specifically for those who are eligible for free school meal.
Right, unlike the Mayor of London scheme.
Exactly, which is universal for all people.
Okay, so there is a tighter definition of eligibility for that scheme. Okay, thank you very much.
John, thank you. When I first started paper, I found myself going, oh, could we not use this to help parents on school uniform? And then until I got to the GCL of how much money you thought would actually be able to be distributed, which was £50. So my question is whether some of the public health grant could potentially be used to help parents, because I know when I was a trustee of Clement James, they said literally borrowing £20 and you suddenly get yourself in debt for that extra pair of shoes or what have you. So my other question is, have we ever looked at match funding? So, for example, and it's part of the fairer paper next, actually asking some of those people who have got deeper pockets if they will help match fund and we can redistribute a larger sum. Don't know what the complexity is and whether that's something we ever considered.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Gardner. Do you want to?
Well, I suppose the general point is that if you give a cost of living payment to households, then they are free to use it towards school uniforms. So I don't see a tension between the paper and what you've suggested. Equally, though, it could be more targeted towards that purpose. The other thing I would flag is I know that the Thomas Pocklington Trust does or can give money towards school uniforms. So there is a kind of I don't know whether I'm right to call it the third sector, but there is a mechanism which the council helps to administer for people to have support with things like school uniforms, and perhaps it's something that over the medium term we could look at whether it's in a system that works well or could be expanded.
And I think there's
So there are two questions. The other one is match funding generally.
I mean,
So it's not just £50. It's
I mean, I think that if we're seeking to increase the level of the cash payment, then we should seek to do so from the council budgets. I think it is possible to devise a scheme that does that in a way that does not damage the general fund's revenue position. Having said that, I suppose we should look into match funding. I think the challenge we had previously, because I know that other boroughs have looked into voluntary contribution schemes, is that they are extremely difficult to set up and to administer. And by the time you've got to the point of doing so, there's a kind of disproportionate resource required internally to the benefits it would achieve. So that was one of the reasons we didn't end up pursuing a voluntary contribution scheme. And I guess my starting point would be that there would be the same risks if we were to do it in this context.
And the only thing I might add, if I may, Councillor, is to the link between this paper and the Fair Action Plan. I think there is an opportunity when we look at setting out our stall for how we can build a fairer borough to be able to show the council's leadership in some of this space. And I think then when we look to sort of bring in match funding and look to partners to play a similar role, I think seeing that Fair Action Plan come to fruition is a helpful opener of some of those conversations. We have worked in the past, we've funded indeed people like Kensington Chelsea Foundation who would be a natural partner in some of this space. But equally, we need to be careful not to crowd them out of their opportunity. So I think as part of a broader ask, I think your question is spot on in terms of long-term sustainability of these types of initiatives.
And just to add that the KNC Foundation specifically, we're working with them on this task and finish group, looking at how we can better use some of the lift data. And I think that absolutely opens the door to at least alignment of different types of initiatives, so that different partners aren't funding the same thing. And to the point that was made earlier, sharing communications about the range of support that's available to households, but also potentially to join forces. And certainly they are very open to the council playing a more leading role in that space, it provided that they also have a seat at the table.
Lucy, I was just going to say on that, isn't the KNC Foundation do the winter fuel payments? Yeah. My questions were just around sort of gaps in accuracy in the sort of lift tracker accuracy. So understanding, are you confident you're not missing families out who might be in need of these payments, and how are you sort of working to capture people who might not be? And then just on, I don't think I read in terms of the vouchers for school meals, how are parents able to pay this? You go into any shop with those vouchers and you can pay with you. How does that work?
That's a good question. I can double check on the vouchers. I know schools, as I've said, schools are involved in distributing, but we'll come back to you on that specific question. On the sorry, the other question about
gaps. I mean, how confident are you that you are?
I would say that we talked earlier about the simplicity of a scheme and the administrative complexity being kind of something that makes schemes harder to deliver. I would say that with schemes like this, there's a risk of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Need is really fast changing. Perhaps even more so a couple of years ago, but it's still fairly fast changing. And one person's interpretation of need might be different from another's, but the kind of metrics that you might use to identify need, I mean, you could do it by income, you could do it by whether people have dependents, carers, you could do it by age, gender. You know, there are probably a million ways that you could do that. And so I think one of the things that's good about Lift is that it captures that fairly well. And it's an accepted metric that other boroughs have been using. I'm not sure whether it would be a proportionate benefit to this borough to identify a new means of targeting.
No, I don't necessarily mean that. I just mean, are you sort of doing other work around it if you're worried that this type of targeting maybe sometimes?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots that we do as a council to support people in other ways. I mean, you can probably both talk to that, but I suppose we do things like the existing council tax reduction schemes and the tenancy support fund, which is the council tenants. There are lots of ways that we distribute support and give advice to people outside of the Lift criteria. But for the purposes of this, I think we felt this struck the right balance of the extent to which it could help, whilst not becoming a kind of administrative burden on a council that's already fairly stretched.
Sorry, can I ask one more question?
Just to add on that specific question, I think so you're absolutely right, Lift isn't perfect. There are some people who either choose not to access benefits. There are families who have no recourse to public funds who won't be on the system. It's true that the Lift relies on council data. The advantage is that data is from multiple different sources. And so, for example, on the pension credit example, we're able to identify households who are eligible for pension credit but not accessing. So because it draws data from a few different sources, its coverage is better, I think, than it otherwise would have been if we were just relying on everybody accessing council tax relief, for example.
I was just going to ask too, you mentioned earlier the uptake of people who didn't come forward last year. And I guess, did you learn anything from why they didn't, or sort of was it just comms about it, or sort of that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I know it was quite. I think originally we anticipated we would have about 2/3 of people bank details. The actual numbers were far lower than that, so quite a lot of work had to go into requesting those details. So actually, in the end, I think it was quite a good uptake rate. What I would like to see us do, if we do a scheme like that this year, is use some of the capacity across the council, whether it's volunteers or officers, to make some calls to those households who didn't take it up last year, to understand a little bit more about why that was the case, and to make sure that if they want to, they're able to take up the scheme this year. So we'll be looking at that, and we hope that, subject to legal agreement, we can reuse the bank details that we collected last year, so that in as many cases as possible that payment could be automatic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to follow on from your point about Lift. As I recall, the last time we had a paper that included Lift, it talked about some of the limitations there. And I see this very helpful appendix that explains it for everyone. I don't know whether the quality of that data has improved since that last paper. But I was talking to a voluntary sector organisation earlier today who described the previous cost of living support delivery as a fiasco, because so many people who needed it and were eligible didn't know about it, weren't able to access it. Things like the cash first, that seemed to be, delivery of that seemed to be a little bit hit and miss, and the vouchers as well. And when we talk about targeting, I think we need to also be very clear that in previous year, I remember the then lead member standing very proudly in full council, saying that they were giving £100 off every council tax band A to D, which is not what I would call targeting. So I think we need to sort of be clear about the picture that we're painting here. So I think I've understood the question is that you are looking at other things and making sure that people don't fall through the net. And I think in terms of pension credit, if you are eligible for pension credit, that brings you up to a level which people who aren't eligible are already at. And we have some of the lowest pensions in Europe in this country. So actually pension poverty is a thing that if someone is relying on state pension only, that they may well need support as well and need to have consideration. I have a question about the Tenant Support Fund, which I had understood from Councillor McVeigh and from the officers in housing, that this was coming from the HRA. And here I seem to see it being described as it's coming from this government fund. So I wonder if you could clarify that, please.
Who's going to tackle that one, Joe?
On the second question, you're absolutely right. The Tenancy Support Fund is mainly funded from the HRA. There was, I think, a contribution in the first half of this financial year from the Household Support Fund to that Tenancy Support Fund, specifically, I think, of £150,000. But we can double check that and get back to you.
Right. So I thought this year it was budgeted 500,000, and I have not been made aware that that's been augmented.
Right.
And I don't know who thought that was a decision to be made. As far as I know, there's a bit of underspend in that 500,000. So I think that's an area of confusion that I would like some clarity on. And I certainly think in terms of this paper where we're talking about government household support fund for cost of living, the emphasis is put in this paper on the tenancy support fund doesn't seem to match what I understand the true picture to be. And it would be a shame if the paper were to be misleading in that regard. I think I want to echo the comment about £50. I'm struggling to see how, if there was an underspend, and B, that's going to be used to augment this year's amount, is there a particular reason why the payment has been halved? Is it to reach more households or?
No, it's not. The last year's payment was to lift households, and this year's payment is suggested to be from the lift households. It's a recognition of the financial envelope that I suppose the collective leadership team currently suggests is reasonably available, and that's under review.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that it's under review, and I think whoever can help to make the case for that. Maybe.
Well, perhaps you can help me make it.
Well, I was thinking, I didn't want to put myself forward, but and I also wanted to add quickly for Councillor Gardner, in terms of school uniforms, there are voluntary sector organisations in the borough who do provide support for school uniform provision, whether that be vouchers for free school uniforms by exchange and recycling. Not always organisations supported by the council, I should add, but they are out there. And on the consultation, which I hear was the biggest consultation in the whole council, and we've had quite a few big ones, was that open to everyone or only to people who had already accessed support?
No, so that consultation was, I think it was about this time last year, in fact, prior to launching the £100 payment. And that was what we did through that consultation is targeted primarily those who would be eligible for the payment. So because we have contact details for people on the low income family tracker, we also shared the detail with voluntary and community sector organisations, and I think with this committee and with councillors. And so the idea, and that was, I think we had about 1,400 responses. When we say the biggest, it was numerically the biggest in terms of responses that we got from that, because there was a lot of interest and a lot of people responding directly. In fact, we also had calls from people to the customer service centre immediately, assuming the payment was available, which I think is an indication of how much people needed and felt they would appreciate that. So yeah, numerically it was the largest, and it was open. It was in theory open to anyone, and actually we asked people as part of that consultation whether or not they would be eligible for the payment.
So my concern is about people falling through that safety net. And what we can do to minimise that, given that it has happened to a large extent in the past.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a sort of more fundamental question about whether these two suggested funding methods were right, and whether you'd considered, for example, extending free school meal provision for longer. I know that as long as we decide by March 25, I think we can spend it later. Or, for example, rather than giving everybody £50, targeting pensioners within the lift scheme, particularly in view of the winter fuel allowance position now. So basically you seem to be doing the same as before. And I know the £50 is deemed to have been a success. I'm not quite sure what the criteria for that was, except for people who got £50 if they liked it, or £100. I'm not surprised they did. Really effectiveness for us is getting the money to the people who need it most, I would argue, and everybody would say they liked it. So are we absolutely certain that these are the two most effective routes, and wouldn't something like perhaps the two I've described be better? And should you say so to the leadership teacher?
Just on that question about extension, so the government has committed to continuing the household support fund next year, so there's no reason that couldn't be used to extend the free school meal offer further. I think it's quite important that that's probably in lockstep with the Mayor of London scheme as well. And I think we absolutely could look at the targeting the payment differently. There is, as I've suggested, a kind of simplicity about lift. I think there was a general acceptance last time around that this was that there was, and to Councillor Simmons' point, that rather than creating discretionary schemes which people have to apply for, which often mean that people don't hear about them and fall through the gaps, there is a simplicity about paying people directly. You could do that for pensioners. There has been quite a lot of work to increase the uptake of pension credit, and that's had quite a lot of success. But one advantage of working closely both with the lift data and with the voluntary and community sector partners is that we can try and understand where some of those gaps might be and where some of that need is. And if we do a scheme like that this year, what I would see that, to Councillor Pascal's point, doing is enabling us to follow up to see whether there is something even more targeted that we could do. So I don't think it includes that.
So I mean, I suppose I would we might have a recommendation that the leadership team should at least be made aware of the fact that there are other mechanisms that we could use, and other, rather than just doing the same, think about alternatives. You know, I'm particular thing that I'm pretty sure that this free school meal offer is very effective and very well targeted, but you know, other people may disagree, but at least to have a bit more of a conversation about it.
If you can add into that, using the access by one of the schemes to provide access for other schemes, so it goes across the system, like we added into that recommendation.
And I have one other question, and that is, do we think, in the light of what the work we've done on lift and so on, that our council tax reduction scheme is in the long term a good way of spending 14 million to help our lowest income families? And is that something that we should consider in the long term? I mean, I think it's very, I'm sure there are flaws in the data, but it's very interesting that we have now got this data set put together and something that no doubt will get better and will build on and use in the long term. And it may be a better way or a different way of targeting people in the long term. But anyway, thank you very much for all of your responses on that. And let's move to the next paper.
That's one point. Are you putting this recommendation?
I am just at the leadership team.
And the access point.
Yeah, your access point as well.
So we are now on to the council's fair action plan. Joe and Callum are glued to their seats here again. No time off for good behaviour.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. He's very smart when he was leaving for everybody else. It's going to introduce this one.
Well, I would just like to thank the team for all the, I mean, this is a huge consultation. I think you probably all gave that the will to live and started going through a number of pages, but Mandy and Holly in particular and Tom have done a really fantastic job. It was not only an online consultation, but I think you can see on 3.4 the number of groups they went out to engage with. They couldn't do it with everybody. We had such a long list and they just didn't have the time to meet up with everybody. But I think they've done a really good job. So this is just an update on the consultation. It's not the fair action plan, in case anybody thinks that there's something missing. Whether you two want to know anything?
No, I just think to emphasise that there is more time to develop the final plan. We've gone out with a series of proposed actions and objectives. I expect this committee will challenge around measurability, around outcomes, and I think that's absolutely where we need to be. And in fact, we've heard directly from residents that that's what they want to see. But I think it was important to test some of the ambitions and to test the appetite for a plan which was perhaps designed to do something a bit different from some of the kind of equalities and diversity plans that other councils have, which was to look outward and to look at the composition of the borough, the needs in the borough, and what kind of support people want to see. The other thing I would say that, just to echo Councillor Addenbrook's comments, a huge amount of work done on the consultation, but crucially also it's built on other sources of evidence, other consultations which have raised issues that are relevant to this plan. So the Grenfell Legacy conversation, some of the consultations on future Grenfell report, which took place in the north of the borough, and some of the other consultation exercises where people have raised these issues, and just a conversation we had to look at the last paper. I think it's also sought to align more closely with some of the activity going on, whether that's the Household Support Fund or the use of the public health grant, to bring together some of those themes so that we can make sure the council is making the best use of its collective resources as we flesh out some of these objectives out.
And the other thing I might add is to say that the council's obviously done quite a lot of work on the fairness agenda. More broadly, it has been for a while. And this isn't captured in this current paper. We will articulate it in the final plan, because this is about the feedback to the consultation. But I think there is an opportunity here to see the connection to the broader Grenfell inquiry work, to our commitments, in terms of thinking about how we connect with all of our residents in a way to show that this council is on their side, that recognises the experiences that they live through in all different types. And I think that what I am hopeful for and working to is to be able to set out a clear action plan that really does allow us to really build on those connections and show the type of council we want to be going forward in terms of that work.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Will.
Thank you very much. You've already answered my point on the alignment in two papers, so I won't ask that. The next question I wanted to ask is to do with the fact that out of this work, there seems to be coming strong message that education and work, and particularly access to work, it's not just being ready for work, it's actually getting real access to work. Now, very crudely, the sort of division of age groups that we're looking at in FCSB and trying to sort of map of that. And you see hurdle points at 0, 2, 5, 11, 16, 18 and 21. The two broad groups seem to come into alignment with this paper. One is the group of 16 to 21, so those who are trying to get access to work. maybe after leaving off GCSEs or after they've got a degree or some qualification. And then you've got the group from conception through to given in secondary school first, the first time of secondary school. The reason I'm putting that out is to ask the question as to whether the problems that the 16 to 21 age group are giving as an answer to your consultation are actually being fed back to those who are providing the building blocks to get the next cohort or the next cohorts coming up. A learning loop as to what works, what doesn't work, and what needs to be done more as early interventions, which perhaps are not within the standard Ofsted curriculum requirement, but in the broader curriculum to enable the future cohorts to align with what's needed for practical access to work.
Yeah.
So that's the question.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And I know that at the budget committee the other week, there was a paper came about the broader employment skills review we're doing in the council right currently. We are just preparing proposals to be able to bring to you as a result of those conversations. But in there is a building block that we want to be able to build on through here that basically says, at the moment, we have 12 different teams working on employment skills in children's, in adults, where there isn't necessarily that connection. And what we're proposing is to have one overarching mission, vision, set of outcomes for going forwards that all functions trying to support employability in the long run are aligned, even if different parts of the council will be working people on that journey going forwards. And critically, I think one of the key things we want to understand more is we've got the great schools that we have most of our young people really thrive in those settings, and we have had that for some time, and yet some of this data in terms of employability of older adults but also of younger adults isn't changing. So we need to be able to understand why is that the case, to make sure that we're targeting the right types of investment, the right types of opportunity to give everybody that chance to be able to break some of those cycles of unemployment that we know exist. So I think your question is spot on, and I hope by the time we come back with a full action plan, we'll be able to flesh out a full response.
When you get to an action plan, what would be very interesting is as to whether that later cohort gives some lessons, which asks questions of what primary schools do, even at Rising 5, sociability, oracy, and such like that.
Exactly, and how well the careers functions in each of those school settings are working with those children who are coming from those deprived backgrounds who might not otherwise be accessing that support, and is that investment properly aligned to the people we want to see a difference?
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks very much. A couple of things that leapt out to me that you might want to think about for the action plan. The first one is there's quite a lot of focus in the paper on Golborne Ward as London's poorest ward. It isn't surprising, just as London's poorest ward. But I think we shouldn't forget that there are pockets of low income everywhere, and even in the wealthiest wards like mine, there are people on low incomes, and just because their neighbours are affluent doesn't mean to say that everybody is. So we can't let those people be forgotten just because we happen to have London's poorest ward in the borough. Important though just to recognise that. Second point, and something we can perhaps do something practically about in the plan, paragraph 4.15, the lowest point, as a stark figure about those who can't speak English well, 3.5 times more likely to be deprived in the education domain. And there's a public comment on that in the example comments on page 91, which is quite very well articulated. Now, the council does provide help to digitally excluded with computer training. I know it's not going to benefit everybody, of course, but it will benefit some. To what extent can we help with signposting people to English language training or something similar? Do we do any at the moment? Can we do more in that space? Even if we can't afford to do it ourselves, can we encourage it? So what can we do along those lines? And is that something that we can think about seriously for the action plan?
Just take those 2 points. So I think on the first point, it was about poverty and poverty. Yes. So I think some of that is reliant on the older data from the Index of Multiple Deprivation, which is 2019. It's supplemented by the census data, which is from 2021. But we've also got the Low Income Family Tracker and other tools. And I think we need to get what are the that's in here is, which I hope will be welcome to this committee, is to use data in a more intelligent way to drive our focus and to ensure we're focusing our initiatives in the right ways and in the right places. And I think there's a real opportunity to do that. And we've drawn out the Goulburn example partly because it suggests that the drivers of deprivation in Goulburn are actually the same as they are elsewhere in the borough. So we aren't seeing radically different patterns. What we are seeing is particular drivers which feature absolutely in Goulburn, in Nottingdale, in Dalgarno, but also in Chelsea Riverside and even in pockets of more affluent wards in the borough. So I think that's absolutely right. The second point I think is a really good example of where we perhaps need a different kind of insight and data, and where I think there is the potential to do some qualitative work through the Fair Action Plan to understand, for example, for households whose first language isn't English, what kind of support would help. What barriers are they facing? Is it a matter of joining them up with provision which is already there? Or is it that the provision actually isn't there and this is a gap that we need to address? And I think through a combination of that use of quantitative data and some more ethnographic qualitative work to understand where we've identified specific groups that the quantitative data tells us there are barriers, what are those barriers and how can we help overcome them?
And we fund language related support, both through adult skills learning support and also through voluntary community sector provision. I think for me the question is it targeted, and do the people who need it, benefited from it, do they know it's there, is it advertised to them, are the sort of skills teams in my department working effectively and sort of advertising the materials and the opportunities with insight from our housing colleagues who for whom we're the landlords for some of these people and working with our registered providers. And I think at the moment the answer probably is not well enough. And therefore we've got support, but is it really connecting and therefore is it actually matching to the skills gaps that some people might have to enable them to work forwards? So I think the work Joe's described is absolutely right, and then also part of the broader approach that we want to take to employment. I think we should be able to unlock better outcomes without additional investment, because the investment is there, it's just not connected.
And I think actually it gives us an opportunity to look at all our voluntary sector and what they're offering, and is it the right offer? Sorry. So that was water.
I mean, one other aspect is whether it's culturally appropriate. Because, for example, women may, from certain cultures, may feel more inhibited about taking it up. But if we make it culturally appropriate for them, I mean, I think Greg's point is that helping people to learn English is a much better way of helping people than actually providing translation services. We need to do both, but actually to help more people into speaking English.
Anyway. It's better than I could have put it, but actually if you fund translation services, that's all very well council services. It doesn't have any wider application, whereas if somebody can speak and operate in English, they can do all sorts of other things beyond the council.
Yeah, but schools can help a lot even with adults.
Joanna.
Just two questions. Page 60, there's a comment, youth council members, and one of my questions is generally about needs, and actually, do we only talk to the loudest as opposed to as many kids as possible? And then my second question was on page 123. This is the duration stats, and in the actual table, the housing third one down, housing shared dwelling where there was no central heating. 21.8%. And that one, we have a London ranking of 8 out of 33. And yet when you look at the other rankings above, we're 30 or 31 or 23. Can you explain to me why that one is so out of kilter in terms of 8 out of 33?
Looks like the answer to that is no.
I'm looking
So do we let them come back?
Shall I answer the first question then? So in terms of the youth council, I think the engaging with young people is always a bit difficult, because it's not always the main thing they want to do, to speak to people from the council, to be really honest. But I think if you can approach people in the right way and open the conversation in an approach, I think there are opportunities. The work that we did on the Future Criminal Support consultation, where we worked with schools in school settings, I think is a pathway. But equally, schools rightly are not always going to open their doors for every consultation under the sun because they've got to protect the young people that they support. I think we've built networks with voluntary sector organisations who are championing the voice of youth to try and make sure that alongside the Youth Council, which is a fantastic resource, that we are working people, but nonetheless it is
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think there is again, that particularly perhaps to Councillor Pascal's point about education and training, there is some more specific follow-up work. I think we have to use the brilliant resource that is the Youth Council, and we have to build those connections and make the most of their energy and commitment. But there is also, I think, through identifying some of the specific challenges that young people face, whether that's in early years or at age 16 to 21, could we do some more work to understand the specific barriers? And we'll come back to you, Councillor Gardner. I think, they're all measuring slightly different things, and I would imagine, I'm not entirely clear whether the ranking issue is good or bad, in the sense that if you're 8 out of 33, does that mean you're among the most?
I view that as bad.
Yes, so and I
didn't
think that,
understand why that one was so article.
and I think that is likely to be because of the pressure on housing supply, and the fact that this is about shared dwellings or overcrowding, and the fact that we know there are lots of households, I think partly because of the pressure on supply, our allocation scheme means that the definition of overcrowding is higher than it is elsewhere. So my guess would be that that's partly it, but we'll come back to you on this.
Thank you, Lucy.
Joanna's just my young voices comment.
So,
No,
probably you want to move on?
I have another one. It was just referencing the point where it says most women who come here and have small children worry about employment. They want to work, but they have no support to look after their young children. Just wanted to understand for young parents, particularly single parents, who want to get back to or into work and feel the stress, what type of support could we offer, do we offer, and are other authorities, so local authorities, offering to young women who are in this situation?
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a great question. I think that is probably I can't think off the top of my head of a service that is specifically commissioned for that provision. We do a lot of work through the housing employment team if there are tenants or indeed a tenant of RP in some of that cases in terms of individual one-to-one work to try and unlock broader support that they might need. I again would like to come back to you unless you know more.
No, I don't, but I think it's another area which would benefit from that kind of qualitative approach. So I know that other London boroughs have done some very successful kind of peer-led research among among parents, single parents particularly, who are struggling to juggle childcare with work. And I think that is exactly the kind of work that would help to unlock, by building on their insights, looking at what we already have available and working out whether there are specific things that we could do here that might help with that problem. It's another really good area to focus on.
Thank you. I think that's very good.
Thank you. I've just got 2 on this one. And I'm not sure this is actually a question. Maybe
We only like questions. Come on.
well, I'll try to put the question mark at the end then. So
Rising intonation.
yeah. So this paper does, I think, very much align with some of the work and the commitments that have been made following the inquiry report. And in the interest of being a fairer borough, which is the aim, I wanted to ask about the distribution of resources, whatever those may be, whether it's housing or household support or other support or support to the voluntary sector. It's really important that that's seen to be fair and transparent. And there are examples I could give you where people feel that it isn't. And I think that fuels certain perceptions of the council which are not positive. So I guess if I turn that into a question, is that on your horizon and is that something you'll be thinking about looking into?
Brilliant.
Yes, and I think that speaks to a broader question, which is that there is kind of both fairness, but also there is a sense of fairness. There are questions about the
Seems to be fair.
Exactly, and whether people feel that they are treated fairly, both when they come to access council services and indeed where they can access council services. So I think that broader question about people's sense of fairness and whether they feel fairly treated is something that we could definitely address in the final plan. On the question about resources, and indeed we've had a discussion about the Household Support Fund, I think both we need to be very clear and transparent about how we are supporting this plan moving forward. And Callum's mentioned some of the public health funding that might support this type of work, and so that we're clear about how it's being used and how people can access it. But I think that question about how people feel about fairness, which I know is something that came up through the inquiry engagement and that we try to address in the inquiry response, needs to be at the heart of this, as well as some of the facts and figures about needs in the public.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I do think there's two sides to it. But part of it is about perception.
Yeah.
But part of it is about what's driving that perception. Because I think in some the examples I can think of in my ward, not to identify anyone or anything, I, as the ward councillor, am concerned that it doesn't look very fair to me. But I think as long as those two sides are both considered.
I think also there's a link there to the broader savings and transformation work, which this committee has looked at in terms of the underlying principles we're attempting to achieve there, which is to ensure that efficiencies we make in this organisation are driven to ensure that we can have a greater needs-based focus on those who really need the support, whether that be through universal services or additional targeted support. So that is, in a short answer to your question, it is within our thinking. But it is probably the broader responsibility of the whole council to handle it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
just to say, this can't just sit here, it has to go
It has to
across
go across. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. And then just finally, we are making quite a lot of reference here, which I'm pleased to see, to the census of 2021. Is there anywhere online that we can access the ward by ward breakdowns for our census now? Because I know some councils have been asking for that for a very long time.
Yes, and we've got individual ward profiles being published imminently based on that data. We're just double checking those against kind of other data sources. But I think the other thing that I would like to see as part of this work is a really clear, robust evidence base, which also makes use of more recent data, including some of the lift data, which obviously changes all the time. But I think we shouldn't get too hung up on what is older and older census data from a specific year, which I think had its peculiarities because of COVID, among other things. So absolutely, we will make that information available. I think that the question for us and the question for the team is how can we build a slightly more dynamic understanding, both quantitative and qualitative, of the needs of people in our borough.
Thanks. I do think it is really, really important. The fact it's taken 3 years took for us even to be able, and we're still not there yet, to even be able to see our ward data, which means we're going by 2011. That's the best as councillors that we have. Whatever else you might be using internally, I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
And those of us who know a little bit about data, we can capable to interpret it and interpret the limitations of it. But we're not just going to say, oh, we'll just wait for the next census, and then after that we'll wait another 4 years, and then that'll be out of date. And we will never get proper timely access to the census data, which we will need to be able to see. So I hope that is going to come quickly, and given that it comes from the ONS, I'm curious what sort of checking needs to be done.
Yeah.
But I hope that comes soon.
And Councillor Simmons, I would just apologise for that delay. So it hasn't been a delay since 2021 because the data then wasn't released, but it still has been an unacceptably long delay. That data is all available online, but as you rightly point out, it's not possible for everybody to interpret that because it does require skills and quite a lot of patience. So I apologise for that delay.
Other councils have done it, and we are interested in being the best councils. So it's not a thing that it can't be done.
And if I can just add, we have been having wider conversations about data and my theory that data goes off like habit, and that it really needs to be quite fresh to be useful to us. And putting too many layers of discussion in between the haddock and us doesn't do anybody any good. So I think you point out a thing which is part of wider discussion, and particularly for our scrutiny committees, the importance of data is really can't be overemphasised.
And so, just mentioned that it has been published. So
It has been.
Yes.
Somebody please send me the link then.
Pretty.
Okay, so Councillor Hammond's already asked why did you focus on goals, so that was very good. So thank you. But I do have a couple more questions. Callum, you mentioned earlier on about we offer a lot of services. I think one thing that keeps on coming back and again is a consultation process. So, you know, because we run them very often, but they're never effective enough, or people feel that they haven't been consulted. So that would be something, you know, that we definitely need to improve on. And I'm hoping that, you know, that there is a focus there on that one. And my two other points were on page 28, 128. You talk about in your table ward level focus comparing Goulburn to the borough average. It says unemployed or economically inactive. It seems the number seems pretty high. It says 35% of households of are economically inactive. And does this include, again, my question is, you know, what is the demographic of this population?
Yeah, my understanding is that is out of the working age population in the ward.
Right, so they're not disabled, they're not single mothers, they're not.
No, I think it would include those people, but it wouldn't include people who are not of working age. So that's my understanding.
Right. Okay. So if they're people with disability, then so that's why you think the figure is quite high.
Yeah.
That's a very high figure.
Yes, and there is a very clear correlation both in Goulburn and in other parts of the borough between disability and economic inactivity.
And I guess also to the point that somebody who picked up, it is very high, and that is why we want to focus on Goulburn as well as everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
It has been very high for some time, and without focus, it may not change.
Right. And may I add that Notting Dale has come into that top 10 of the most deprived in London since Grenfell and since all of the investment that has happened.
Thank you.
And I would like to ask a question.
Can I just come back on the consultation? I think, consultation is very difficult. People either want to engage on something or they don't. And I think we learned a lot through consultation and future grant support. And I think this is where Mandeep has, and Tom and Holly and everybody have gone out in a different way to consult with people. They went out, so there was an online consultation, but they went out, met groups in the community because people can't come to something, but they can go there, whatever it is. So they learned a lot from the Grant Partnerships team.
Right, okay, thank you. And Chair, if I may just one, the other thing on page 131, I just felt that the way the questions are drafted, most people would agree with them. So did you ever consider, you know, giving any alternative? I mean, to me, the rhetoric there is, I mean, it's good for, you know, if there's any added value there. Sorry to be so brutal.
No, that's a really helpful kind of.
You know, giving people an option of X or Y.
Yes. What we did through, so this was the second phase of consultation. The first phase of which was much more closer engagement with groups and looking at some of the other consultations that had been done that touched on questions of fairness and equality. And so these aims and actions were developed kind of on the basis of that work. And this exercise was really about testing them. And I think it was important to feel like they had the confidence of people who responded to the consultation, but actually we had quite a lot of challenge around some of them needing to be, in fact, some people saying this all sounds very well, but what does it mean in practice? How do we make it work? So I think these came out of some of the consultations we had already done, and so this was more about testing them in exactly the way that you described.
I'd like to ask a question about why the report doesn't include the sort of the distribution of council services. So do we keep the north of the borough as beautiful and tidy and clean as we do the south of the borough? Do we put as much effort into road traffic management or street scenery in every single part of the borough? Is that sort of distributed? I mean, I know there's an element of sort of NSIL, and there's also an element of, you know, how people choose to spend city living local life. But are we confident that we are fair in the distribution of our services? And I think that ought to be, my recommendation is that ought to be included in the report, because I think it's a question that doesn't crop up.
No, I don't think it's just a question of north and south. I think that's the metric that's here. It's a question of aiming at the areas of need, be they small pockets in metro parts. It's to do with the people in need, not just the area in need.
Currently, I think we have proportions of that data, but perhaps not all of it. And we were talking to
Coming back to that haddock, don't we?
Yes, but it's also about systems, which is another topic, which is around how we have the accuracy in terms of the reporting process of some of the particular, like say, for example, rubbish on the streets. The more systematic we are in terms of how that is reported, automated, tracked, GPS, identified, and then be able to look at outcomes rather than outputs, which I think sometimes we're in a little. But the broader performance work that the team have been doing, I think, answers that to a degree. With the data we have at the moment, and I agree we can include it in the broader direction and to show them.
And there is a specific commitment in this plan about the way we use data and checking that we can build that picture in exactly the way that you described of the distribution of council services, given that we understand quite a lot about the distribution and patterns of deprivation in the borough. Are we then confident that we are delivering our services in a way that complements and supports that and helps to achieve better?
Yeah, so fundamentally, I suppose what I'm talking about is the non-needs-based services. Are we as proportionate in the distribution of those? Because clearly we can't be with the needs.
There shouldn't be a difference.
Yeah, there shouldn't be a difference.
We can certainly try and map some of that. I think there's no reason that we couldn't use the litter index or other things to show the distribution of that across the borough.
Thank you. So that's a recommendation together with, there were some other points that people raised, which you can refer to the minutes for because I didn't take enough detailed notes, but, and we'd just like some reassurance that those points would be included in the final plan. I think other than that,
I'd like to emphasise the question of the learning loop and older cohorts to earlier provisions and interventions.
thank you very much for presenting it. Thank you. Stuart, I don't know how you got to be last again, but thank you very much for wasting so patiently.
That's all right.
As we turn to our final of start. Others, which is the community safety. Thanks, Stuart. Which one of you is marvellous double acting into?
So this paper is not about consultation. I asked the community safety team to carry out a review because I just felt that there's quite a lot of grey areas and we have seen a change in some serious crime, which is totally unacceptable. But I think there is confusion about what the community safety team does, what they can do, what they can't do, and what the police do and what the other stakeholders do. So I asked Stuart to go away and have a think about it. And so he's got this far so far.
Yeah, so I think just a couple of, just to add to that, it's been an awful year for violence. It's been terrible. I came off of the latter part of last year was pretty good as well. We've been changing the way in which we work and responding to the communities that are particularly affected by violence, and we've been raising our profile within those communities, spending more time within those communities, and not just following the incidents. From that, it's quite apparent that well, in the first instance, that was warmly welcomed. But it's apparent that we're not really doing enough. We're not getting out there enough. Not enough of our residents, particularly those who really need our services, are aware of what we do, how we do it. And that's absolutely key. We recalibrate the way in which we deliver community safety services. So all of our communities know who community safety services are and how to access the various services, but particularly those communities that are impacted by violence and might be living in fear know who we are and how to access us. And that further on, about the extension of that is that we're working in those communities, shoulder to shoulder with those communities to solve their problem.
I would only add, just drawing people's attention to paragraph 1.5 in terms of the aims of the review of what we're attempting to show there. I won't read them out, but really, again, this, as Stuart mentioned, this builds on that question of connection and showing and trying to build that sense of confidence within our communities that does not exist everywhere currently. That this council recognises, understands, and is sort of really pushing the boundaries to make sure that people are as safe as possible, with primacy clearly with the police as a partner, but clearly also our partners are our residents. We need to make sure that they see that we're working for them.
Thank you. I'm going to start not asking a question for myself, but for Portia, who's not here.
And she asked about paragraph 5.9, the point about increased visibility, which I think probably is at the crux of some of the things we're discussing tonight, is how are we actually going to achieve that, and how are we going to measure it? Have we got a baseline, and how will we measure that we've actually got a certain portion? That's my question.
So we're developing that response in kind of consultation with residents on what they tell us. We received some quite strong messages back, which said, in a broader sense, we're really pleased that you're here in the community. Following a critical incident, we'd like to see you in between incidents. So during the kind of BAU, there's some things that we're putting in place. So we're putting in the south, so in Chelsea, in Kensington, and in North Kensington. From January, we will have a regular monthly drop-in, which will be police council, which will promote locally and widely, which will be a space within a community setting, not in a council building or not in a police building, where residents can come along and they can talk to us and try and work with them to solve their problems. What we want to get away from is residents going into the police and the police going, he's going to speak to the council, or the other way around. So we need to standing shoulder to shoulder. So doing more of that and making ourselves more available in community settings and being directed by residents, actually. So we're having conversations with residents via kind of the various community meetings. That being one of them. We're in Goulburn. There was a meeting in Goulburn last Thursday following the shooting. We're having residents with as many residents, having conversations with as many residents as possible, trying to meet them on their own terms in their own places, in their own spaces, to try and increase that visibility. And the kind of measures around that, we're not there yet on being able to kind of baseline and measure. And I think that we'll continue those conversations as we go forward and listening to residents about that visibility.
And the only thing I might add is when we come back in March, we clearly need to be able to have metrics that articulate what success of this review would look like. For me, at an early stage, listening to our colleagues in the police, there is something about the level of reporting that is coming to the police in terms of people feeling confident to share witness statements, to share information that they have. And I think part of what we're attempting to set out here is to try and work with our police colleagues to address some of that, for them to feel confident. Why would you make that step of potentially putting yourself in what might feel a risky environment if you don't have trust that the systems are going to act on it and work with you? And what I would want us to achieve is to reduce the barriers for someone to make that step. So I think that could be an example of a demonstrable metric.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Pretty next.
Okay, again, I was going to ask the centre of visibility, and one of the, especially in Camden Ward, the amazing positive feedback we've got on visibility is the bid wardens. I mean, it is absolutely, and that is, that's absolutely crucial. And I think I agree, the police have been very engaging in one of the social housing where they've developed a relationship and they actually drop by when needed. And I think we've organised this quarterly drop-ins, and which is proving to be a great success. So yes, visibility is, I mean, nothing beats that, and that's what I would say. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Well,
to answer the question, does your safety review cover the involvement of the public in the sense that Robert Hill said all citizens are police and some of them are paid to do it as a profession? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how do you propose to make use of mobile phones, ring bells, RBI, etc., and also via a fit-for-purpose council reporting app? Because we still, I think, are lacking in that respect. Third part of the question is, what lessons are being learned from, as Pretty has said, the bids? And in my case, it's particularly the experience of the Kings Road Partnership, their work with my body, street enforcement team, police, the retail community, and now increasingly the general public, because they are engaging and making use of modern data. They actually name and shame the top 10 risk grants and the 10 Kings Road on a revolving basis.
Thank you. That's a response.
Yeah, so, first one, about involving the public, involving our residents, is absolutely central to what we want to achieve. At the meeting that we were at last week, in Goulburn Ward, both myself and Superintendent Owen Alden made the point that we can't deliver our ambitions on our own. We need to do that with our residents. And we want to create more spaces where we are working collaboratively with residents around solving problems. An example of some of that our work is that we have a resident-led and shared CCTV advisory group, and it was that group that helped us guide how we allocated our resources when we were developing our CCTV, and they set the priorities for our CCTV strategy. So that's not without risk. We're giving, when you're genuinely entering into those collaborative relationships, you're giving up a bit of power within that. And I think that we want to be able to develop more of those relationships where we are working side by side with residents, solving their problems and bringing police and bringing others into that. The technology side, I think I'm probably the worst person in the room to ask about technology, but we recognise that we're not doing enough in that space as we can, and we're speaking to our colleagues in DD&T to think about how we can really up our game around that, because the world's moving quite fast and we need to keep up with that. And it's an obvious one, but it's particularly for young people, and young people are becoming central to this and are continuing to be central to the conversations we're having and shaping what we're doing. So yes is the answer, but I don't know the how. But we want to work on that. We have ambitions around that. And then the last one is the bids and business community. I think I came here last in February, and Councillor Jackson, who's had to leave, asked me about the relationship with the bids and the business community. And I think I can now tell a much more positive story about our relationships with the bids and the business community than I could a year ago. We've really concentrated on developing our relationship with bids. I'm working much closer to them, and that kind of includes around the problem solving. I'm bringing them into some of our problem solving forums and work. And we have further ambitions to work with the bids in the future as well. So the business community is really important to us.
I'd finally say that I'd just encourage you to have a specific meeting and learning from the Kings Road Partnership, because I think of all the bids, they are the most advanced.
Very good.
That's my observation of listening to residents in my ward particularly, and they recognise, because they read the news, that we've got a gang war problem, we've got some very serious crimes as a result of that. But it's not the universal experience for everybody north and south of the borough. It's the low-level antisocial behaviour, it's shoplifting, it's dangerous cycling through red lights, even driving through red lights, and lack of visibility of police. And people are giving up. They're not reporting everything. These low-level things. And I think we need to recognise that, and we need to work with the partners and try and get some. I don't know what we do about it, but that's to reflect the reality on the ground of what people are saying.
Councillor, I think you're 100% right. The question of safety for our residents is different in different places. We need to make sure that our provision, what we provide, what we focus on, what we monitor, what signals we provide, speak to all of those different experiences. And whether that be people who might be more worried about thefts, as you say, or indeed some of the serious violence that's happening in the north of the borough. The safety of all of our residents has to be paramount. And that means we need to make sure our offer is evolved enough, is flexible, is agile enough to account for all of that support. And I take the point that some of what we've talked about today has been more around that sort of really extreme violence that we've seen, but that doesn't mean that addressing that has to come at the expense of ensuring that support is provided.
Well, I think quite the opposite. The squeezing out the low-level violence, the broken window syndrome actually.
Indeed,
actually,
But it's, and it's making sure that whole connection is
that's sort of the biggest up, and I'm sure the problem with the shoplifting is no better or no worse in Goldwall Ward than it is in South Kensington, because it's a universal problem, so it's there everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think I would ask that any resident association meeting you go to, you reinforce the point that they must report all and any crime, because that is the only way we can see what's going on and the tasking can be done.
I'm just finding out, I sort of add to that, is that part of our role is absolutely key is to support the police, but it's also to bring the challenge where appropriate and at the right level. And sometimes that's at a very senior level as well. Because those crime and antisocial behaviours types that you describe there, councillor, they can be really impactful, particularly if they're kind of repeated day in and day out and they really affect people's daily living. So we need to kind of be minded around what some may see as lower level crime and antisocial behaviour can have very, very high impact.
Thank you, Joanna.
Let's go back to 1.2, because when you look at our position as regards Westminster and Westminster and Fulham, why is our position so much worse? I mean, they've had an increase of 5 and 1%, whereas we're up at 10%. That's not just reported.
So, in the time since this has been published, I've come to question that 10% increase in this paper. So I would like to take that away.
Right. Thank you. I'm trying to move on to the next question. Seeing as the community safety wardens have moved into the set team, do you feel that you have lost both your visibility on the streets and also the feedback that you would get? So essentially, you're no longer in the public eye. It's just people don't really know the council has a community safety function. And secondly, you're not getting the feedback that you used to get from those officers in terms of saying this is a local issue and that's a local issue. And if so, how might you look to address that loss of on feet and on feet?
Really good questions. So we preempted that when the Parks Police and the street enforcement team moved over to Transport and Regulatory Services. We took a fresh look at our tasking and our problem solving. And what we've done is put in place a monthly strategic problem solving group, tasking group, which is chaired ultimately by myself and the superintendent of Alden. But it also has Tim Davis from Transport and Regulatory Services. And that monthly group looks at the most pressing needs that have come from Transport and Regulatory Services, most pressing needs and issues that have come from the police, and pressing needs and issues that have come across the community safety's desk. And it agrees the priorities, it sets the control strategy for the month, identifies 2 or 3 different kind of areas or themes. That then a weekly tasking meeting, which has been in place for quite some time, and has all of the council's enforcement teams, plus the mental health services and the police, and is chaired by community safety. It's then through that weekly tasking meetings that resources are tasked week to week to respond to the control strategy and the issues that are coming up off the ground. So I think in answer to the question, we've kind of that grip, we've increased that grip through that monthly meeting. And I think it was always the case, I think, that the wardens, when they're on the street, were called community wardens. And I haven't got a strong sense that residents connect those to the community safety team. They're the council's community wardens more than anything. Now they're the street enforcement team, they're the council street enforcement team, not necessarily Transport and Regulatory Service. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, good luck with the review. Can I just point out one other thing? Portobello Markets Working Group is just adopting a new pilot scheme where for shoplifters, instead of relying on WhatsApp, they're going to use this database that will, and then go into a series of radios down Portobello. So I think that would be worth you looking at, A, in terms of rollout and the success, and seeing whether it can work elsewhere.
Yeah, we've been
Jane,
involved in those
King's Road,
conversations.
aren't they?
Yeah,
Lucy.
I've got a few questions. My first is just in terms of, I know I spoke to Sarah about this, but when crime happens and it maybe doesn't hit the news, so I mean, I live in Goldburn, but a stabbing which will go onto the news. So in terms of people wanting to understand more about it to harm themselves, that actually it's more targeted than random. What are we doing? Because I think that's something I really noticed the other day when we had something on the end of my street where
Can people address that one? Well, I'm going to say it's all about communication, and actually it's something we bring up with the police all the time, because partnership message is very basic, but they will not tell us anything more. And if a gun's involved, it goes even higher, and then we hear even less, and it is an issue, and I don't really know, we haven't found a way of resolving it yet.
No, I mean, what we also do is, if there's a very serious incident, we go out onto the street with our tabards on, and we engage people as they walk by. We might do a very quick printed material about what we know, and go out and speak to residents. And we go out again and again, which is what we did following some road shooting.
No, I think because of all these different incidents are happening in quite a small space, it's created quite a lot of anxiety around Goldburn or also neighbouring boroughs. Just generally, people, if they can find out in the news, they can reassure themselves. But I think that sometimes when you don't have the context, and I'm not saying, I'm sure there are people in the streets and people, but obviously not everyone's going to get them. So it's how best we can, because if I can be proactive and try and find out, but it's more a lot of people don't have that. And then the other, sorry, I've got two more questions. Is just when you were talking, Stuart, about that you're in touch in the same way, you're in touch with the right sort of communities who are most affected by this, but that sort of part of the community who maybe aren't in those comms, knowing where to go if they need to call up. How are people being signposted about who to call up? And most people would probably call the police, but in terms of council.
So there's a really good point, Councillor. I think that we are not there yet, is the truth. I think we're on that kind of journey. As part of this process, what we want to engage with are the unusual suspects, to engage with people that we don't normally engage with, to try and reach as many communities as possible. I think that BAU ability to get out messages following critical incidents, those type of things, there may be a technology solution that can help us with that. But I don't think we are. I'm satisfied that we're where we need to be on.
I think the points are connected, aren't they? So the standard that Stuart and the team, with working with the police, adopted with the latest shooting, I think I couldn't have been prouder. I think it was exemplary. The question is then, how through this review do we try and make sure that that is the standard for every incident, not only those that really hit that threshold? Because there is something about that proactivity of communication, the understanding of the anxiety of concern, sort of infection that can cause, and the importance of being present and you knowing as a resident in those areas how you can access that support. And I think through this review, we want to be able to work out how do we make what we can do, what we're doing now, and there's a serious incident, bread and butter all the time.
One last point, which is something I feel like came up a couple of years ago, maybe it was after Sarah Everard, of something that was like a map of sort of walking home late at night. Or were we doing something around that? I don't know.
What, safe route home?
Yeah, I don't know. I was just going to ask, just in general, people in winter walking home, or is there anything that we're doing in that space? Just women walking home late at night feeling, I mean, I know that that's when I first heard it mentioned. I don't know when it was, a while ago. And just if we're doing anything in that space for, particularly at a time where people are feeling that crime is rising, whether there's something on a council level. I'm sure there are kind of.
So we are reviewing lighting, aren't we, at the moment in some areas?
Yeah, and within Goldburn Ward, we're putting more CCTV into Goldburn Ward, so there'll be an extra 10 cameras going into Goldburn Ward. I think those kind of women's safety at night, the mayor's been leading kind of developments of that. That kind of links into our violence against women and girls programme. and the work that we kind of do through the Angelou partnership, which is about women and girls safety.
Yeah.
Again, there's always more that we can do around that. So we do an awful lot of work around kind of sporting events where we know there's spikes in domestic abuse, or Ask Angela, which you might be aware of, sort of licensing. So there's a range of different things we do around women's safety.
Thank you.
Thank you. My first question, I'll be both quick. To what extent do we understand what has been driving the recent violence that we had?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I think our understanding of that's very limited, actually. I think that because there are a number of live ongoing criminal investigations, police have kept their cards very close to their chest. So this was a question that was asked last Thursday in the community meeting in Goulburn, and the police was just quite clear that I can't answer that. So I think in time we'll get an understanding, but I think we just don't know at this point. It's not clear.
And as Lucy's point, it is the frustration. We understand why people are frustrated, but please have to give us the information.
Know that they can't share.
Did you have a second question?
I did, thank you, yes. I mean, there are questions in terms of what the police can and can't share, but in terms of as a council, is there anything that is springing to mind, perhaps historical decisions that have been made around services or changing economic environments or anything at all like that that might spring to mind? But that question also applies to ASB. Do we have an understanding of what is driving some of the ASB that we see?
No, because the ASB is quite dispersed and
You mean varied and or geographically?
varied and geographically. Varied and geographically. And yeah, it's quite difficult to get a handle on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the really difficult hurdles, is actually how you can successfully just after this ASB, especially as it is so widespread. And so in following on from ASB, I was wondering, how are we engaging a sort of multi-agency where there is an ASB hotspot, say that may be associated with an area or types of accommodation or certain landlords?
Yeah. So well, it's quite a lot in there. So by the monthly visit tasking, problem solving, the weekly tasking, and also another problem solving which is called the joint action group, which means monthly and looks at those stubborn and persistent antisocial behaviour issues, or a complex issue where it may involve two individuals and they're just not quite sure who the perpetrator or who the victim is, and mental health may play a very strong feature within that, and it requires a multi-agency response.
Yeah.
So by those structures, what we're also doing, we sort of recognise that there are, within the borough, there are over 50 different providers of housing. Now, some of those providers of housing have very good antisocial behaviour policies and teams who are really keen to work with us and with the police quite early on to work and problem solve. Others aren't quite so keen to come to the table in the early stages, and we find we're problem solving much further down the line when we're in crisis. So working with our colleagues in housing they have a senior housing group, which has all of the kind of key registered providers at it. We're seeking to develop, we are writing a protocol with each of the key providers, which sets out the expectations of their service, the key contacts, and that they will work in partnership with us in the structures that I've just described. And we're also thinking about how we can strengthen at senior level the links between myself, the police, and at director level those different providers, specifically around crime and antisocial behaviour.
Okay, thank you. And before we just move on, I just want to flag up one more thing, which is I'm hearing from ADKC that there's been an increase in disability related hate crime. And I just wondered whether you were aware of that and whether anything was in place there. Or...
Yeah, but I think hate crimes are completely underreported. So the police's figures on hate crimes are really, really low. We're working with ADKC. We're fortunate that Owen Ronaldo, Superintendent Ronaldo, is the London Met lead for hate crime. He is going to chair our hate crime partnership board. We met with ADKC, I think it was in September, and had a really good afternoon with them and with Superintendent Ronaldo, and they're going to be part of our board going forward. The key challenges are to support those who may be victims of hate crimes, to understand it's a hate crime, to trust that if they report it, something positive will happen, and that, you know, in regards to them, that there will be justice. For some groups, that's quite a long road to travel because they've had very poor experiences with the criminal justice system in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask one question, and that is, do you think that there is a gap here in what you're reviewing and engaging on the sort of market side? So we're looking, a lot of the crime, in as far as I understand it, is driven by drugs. And we don't know that the latest ones are gang-related, drug gang-related, but a lot of crime is driven by drugs. And some of those drugs are bought by lots of people in very comfortable circumstances who are, by buying drugs, are creating misery around them. Should we be engaging with that market side to be running campaigns to draw attention to just how much, you know, buying cocaine causes misery to people in other circumstances?
Two things on that. So the Combating Drugs Partnership, which is the statutory partnership, does have a commitment to look at that as a theme. So across Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea, to try and, you know, that dinner party cocaine users who, you know, will buy, free range eggs, but will buy cocaine off children.
Yes.
But then there's also something about organised criminal networks that sit above there, and how are we working to support the police in being able to dismantle those organised criminal networks that control the young kids on the streets and on bicycles.
So I think, yeah, I mean, I would suggest that maybe that's a gap that ought to be addressed. I think we've also drawn attention to some other things around here that, so Portia's comment about metrics and making sure we perhaps got some baseline data after this review, because if we're going to be effective, let's demonstrate that we're being effective. And we've also, there's been a lot of emphasis around the table about communication, both in terms of, how do you get to the police, are people aware of how to report stuff, and then reporting back to the public as well on what we found. So I think there's things you picked up, but I think this committee is emphasising their importance in your review. But thank you very much for that, because we've had a wide range of discussion, which I think is all better informed. So thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move on to our internal business. Slightly lose it. So we're looking at the board plan fee students again. So I'm going to call through pages. Right, Joanna.
Could I just ask about our facilities management? Because it came from housing in the budget, and then it was said it was meant to be arts. And we still don't feel we know anything very much about it. And so it keeps coming up here on the different remits. And so I wondered to what extent you might ask for a briefing paper on.
It came up at the last committee and you asked for a briefing paper. Yeah. So you asked for that and soft facilities management. So I got in touch with the officers about the KDs and soft facilities management
contract in there. And I have asked officers if I can have the briefing on our facilities management, because you wanted it circulated outside of the meeting, so you could then decide if you wanted an item. So it is in process, and I'm sorry I haven't got it for this
So that's
meeting.
hard and soft.
No soft one.
Soft, so it's hard.
So it's hard.
Right. Okay.
But like everything
So
else, it's taking a long
I'll
time.
ask if we can have it circulated before the next meeting.
Because we've now moved our repairs paper down the line, but we wanted to understand what's the interaction between
Yeah.
the hard facilities and repairs. But what I'm conscious about is it may have gone out to procurement before we get the paper.
It's going to be an executive decision now, not a key decision, I reform. But I will, tomorrow, I will dig out my email to the officers and give a prompt that they only that report.
Thank you for reminding us that. So paper one, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I'm reading a bit because I know you've read it. Or we're reading 26, 27.
Can I ask that on page 10? There's a
Page 10.
there is a proposal to refurbish Sarsfield School. We've been around for a long time. Question is, how are they going to have to decant the pupils about it? It's interesting. How do you find out about that?
Page 10.
It's page 10, it gets 9 and 10.
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah.
Anybody else with some more information?
Can we ask for more information?
And go back to page 26, page 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 23, 24,
34.
Yep.
34, I just want to observe on 34 that the time-bounded commercial waste has already been seen by the ESC, and that isn't mentioned there. It's the top item on the
Yeah.
page.
It's already been reviewed by the committee. Thank you. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. And I'm not going to try and fix it by pretending there's a page through something. I'm just to fix the all concentrating. Thank you. And then agenda item 9 is our annual work programme. Anyone got any comments on that? Okay. Thank you. And in the absence of
Mary, can I ask a question about the important thing you brought up that's coming up on 19th March, the question of KPIs. Is there any paperwork we can have in advance on that? Because the trying to work one's way through how relevant KPIs actually are is going to be quite a difficult thing to address. And we don't want a paper at the last minute that says this are the KPIs and you've got 2 days to read.
do you mean the council, overall council?
Yeah, so
This is the one for the February meeting. The March.
March meeting, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Is there what I'm saying here is there any information on sort of how KPIs are? Is there like a standard protocol of how KPIs are passed?
Just for procurement for this report, KPIs in general.
Well, it relates to the proposal that we made in the meeting on Monday with regard to the budget from FCS to, it's how, what's the purpose of KPIs? It's not just a question of measuring things and then you've got to report this piece of shelfware. It's actually got to have a purpose. Once you've measured it, what are you going to do with it?
So that, I think, links into the paper on the 3rd of February, the last report, the council plan and performance dashboard.
Yes.
And there was the information that I circulated. I gave your comments to the. So
maybe I'm asking for the feedback from that feedback.
Right. Okay. So I gave all of your feedback to team, to the corporate strategy team on what you wanted to see. So from memory, it was a more concise report, more focused. So I can't really say any more than that because I haven't seen that report. We have asked for it.
But also
That's
link it into the
amazing.
discussion we had on
We've
on the
asked for-
budget.
But all of your feedback, everybody who gave me comments,
Yeah.
I collated into one email and sent it to them.
And we will ask
Have
for,
we had sight
to
of
have
that?
it as early as possible.
Have we had
Yes.
sight of that email?
I can forward it to you
That would
tomorrow.
be a good way of
Yeah.
summarising it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I should have done that before.
Great.
Good, and we're all meeting as a committee in the new year to have a still working group on the effectiveness of scrutiny, and it'll include
That's the Scrutiny Chairs meeting.
scrutiny chairs.
Yeah.
Of course. To talk about, and that will include timeliness of papers and stuff as well. So, thank you very much, everybody, for the end of the meeting, and wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you very much for everything you've done this year, and for the officers. Of course, as well.
Thank you to.
Brilliant chair.
Thank you to our support officers for supporting us.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you to Maxine for sitting right.
Gordon's threshold is fantastic, and